Welcome back to another episode of the Pax What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perry Goldstein. And this week we came up with kind of what we think is a fun game to play now that the Packers have been kind of quiet, made their 2 splashes in free agency, brought back some of their own guys, and then nothing else really happened. This was really a slow week in free agency, not a lot of additional moves. I think the first week really wrapped everyone up, and now we're just seeing the little trickle effect. So Packers quiet this week, didn't make any additional moves, which means that we are going to play red light, green light. And some of you probably played that as a kid. This obviously is a little bit different. The version that we're going with for the sake of the episode is which positions get the green light to go into the 2024 season as is, and which positions get a red light where we think they should stop and reevaluate and add some pieces to the room. And obviously we're doing this before the draft because we expect them to make changes, right? The roster is not what it is. It's not standing going into the season. But as we start talking about the draft in the coming weeks and looking at positions of need, we thought this exercise would help us clarify that. So Perry, how you doing?
I'm good. Today we're recording on Thursday. It is really my Friday. I have a long weekend, so I'm feeling great.
Nice. Well, let's start with quarterbacks, right? I think we both are going to be in agreement here, but how you feeling about quarterbacks, Perry? Red light or green light on Jordan Love and company? And here, I'll do this. We'll also go through the rest of the room. So as it stands on the roster now, there's Jordan Love, Sean Clifford, and Alex Magoo, the prospect out of the United States Football League, played with the Birmingham Stallions and won an MVP there.
Tough one to start off with here. No, I'm kidding. This is obviously a green light. The Packers figured out in the 2023 season that they have their franchise quarterback. He is going to get a massive contract extension come May when they are able to finalize that from the 1-year mark from his last contract extension. Yeah, I think also on top of that, I think Packers fans should feel pretty good about QB2. I thought Sean Clifford, at least in the preseason that we saw, because he obviously didn't play during the regular season, looked like a pretty solid backup. I'm going to derail us like right off the bat and ask you, do you think they bring in another quarterback, at least like as a camp body this offseason? Either they draft someone or they bring in some kind of like someone floating around a vet in free agency?
I think they're for sure going to draft someone. And I say that because at the Combine, Brian Gutekunst made his comments about how they always value competition in the quarterback room and they always like to bring in homegrown talent. So I thought like the idea of a veteran backup made sense last year. Yeah. But now I definitely see them wanting to acquire some guys. So I certainly think at least one day 3 pick is going to go to quarterback. And Tua's brother is in this draft class. So that would be kind of a fun little quarterback room addition. But yeah, I agree. 100% green light for the quarterbacks.
Yeah. I was thinking about it because they continuously brought guys in while Rodgers was the franchise quarterback. I mean, even going so far as like drafting guys higher up than maybe you would have wanted. And these are guys who went on to have like, maybe not like full blown starter careers, but I mean, you look at like Matt Hasselbeck and, you know, some names that like, you would probably recognize who kind of like rotated in and out of Green Bay. So I think it's just like a Packers way to always bring people into that room, even when you have your guy, your dude.
Yeah, I mean, Hundley was a 5th round pick. Matt Flynn, I think, was like a 2nd.
I think Matt Flynn is actually who I was thinking of.
Yeah, Hasselbeck was the 90s.
Hasselbeck was with
Favre.
Yeah, he did play in Green Bay.
Or no, yeah, Flynn was a 7th round pick. Boy, we're getting our quarterback draft years all mixed up. But point being, day 3 pick going to go likely to the quarterback position.
They will rotate guys in who will go play in other places.
Sean Clifford's going to go be like a phenomenal backup somewhere. But yeah, so I agree with you. Green light. Let's talk about running backs next, because I think that one is where things get really interesting. Obviously, the Packers made the big signing with Josh Jacobs, lost Aaron Jones, brought back A.J. Dillon on a team-friendly deal. The rest of that room, Emmanuel Wilson is, I think he signed his tender, so he's back. And then Ellis Merriweather is the other running back on the roster. So reports, of course, that they're kind of high on Emmanuel Wilson. They liked him as a running back too. Brought back AJ Dillon after that report came out. So what do you think for this one? I think this one's tricky.
I mean, I think you have to say green light. They brought in someone who is clearly going to be running back 1. They brought back running back 2, and they have depth at the running back position. I think it would be pretty hard not to look at this room and say green light, because they have guys at all 3 of the phases in which you'd want. And I feel pretty confident that they're all going to be successful. Now, obviously, bringing in a new free agent in Josh Jacobs is going to be a question mark, but he was one of the, top names. He's been a top player in the league. So it's just a matter of finding that fit in Matt LaFleur's offense. I don't think he's going to be a bust.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Josh Jacobs. It stings from a player perspective because Aaron Jones is just so beloved and he's etched all over the Packers franchise history books. But Josh Jacobs is really explosive. And if we're talking about an offense that was ascending, I think he kind of can fill that Aaron Jones role where he unlocks a second gear for this offense. But I give him a red light solely because we see that position being so injury prone. And I know Josh Jacobs can be a workhorse back. He doesn't really have nagging injuries in his career, but AJ Dillon had the stinger at the end of the year. And just by nature, you're expecting your running backs to miss a couple games in the season. So I don't know if I see them going with a day 2 pick anymore, like I maybe had thought originally. I guess with Dillon only on a 1-year contract, they might, but I definitely think they'll add at least 1 or 2 bodies. So red light, but I don't feel terrible about it.
I still feel okay about it, but I agree with you that they're going to 100% add to that room before the start of the season. I think it would just be apt to do that. But this is not a strong draft class for running back either. So it's not going to be one of those years where not like the year that they took Aaron Jones, right? Where they took 3 backs. This is not going to be that. But adding a body would probably be a smart move.
I almost wonder too if the AJ Dillon, coming back was more insurance because they're not sold on anyone in this draft class. So AJ buys you going into 2025 when the class is expected to be better. And then the Packers can swing a day 2 pick and get a guy that they love to pair with Josh Jacobs instead of a guy that they're it's okay. So
it seems that way across the league, because the start of free agency was running back. I mean, every team went after the running back in free agency that they wanted. And it was so counterintuitive to the way you think about how running backs are valued these days, and know the contract terms in dollar amounts wasn't high. So that aligns with value. But in terms of need, clearly teams are saying, we're going to go after this hole on our roster in free agency because maybe we don't see, the guys coming in from the draft, being able to carry the load as much as we see the guys who are already in the league being able to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think running back is definitely one of the positions that's easier to acclimate into the NFL. It's not like you hear about tight ends and you can kind of just line up and go. But, we saw guys struggle early with pass pro. So there's certainly layers to that adjustment, which Josh Jacobs seems to be good at. AJ Dillon has gotten a lot better at. Let's shift then. I think this one's going to be really fun and talk about wide receivers. A loaded room here. You've got Romeo Doubs, Grant DeBose, Malik Heath, Bo Melton, Thyrick Pitts, Jaden Reed, Samori Toure, Christian Watson, and Dontavian Wicks. So red light or green light, and how do you feel about the state of that room?
So many bodies. You're just going to see how I feel about the offense in general now, because green light. I mean, this is a wide receiver room that, like I said, has a lot of bodies, a lot of talent. And this is kind of the season where I think everything's going to shake out in terms of ownership, roles, level of responsibility, who's starting to develop that chemistry with Jordan, who's starting to get the ball maybe a little bit more. I don't know if it's going to be, look, I would love if this offense stayed like equilibrium and kumbaya and everyone shares the load, and and maybe that will be right. Maybe this is like that new wave of offense that we're moving into where that wide receiver one is no longer a thing. Maybe. We haven't seen that evolution of NFL offenses yet, so I don't know. But I think we will start to see a season where the Packers will have an 1,000-yard receiver, and we will hopefully see a season where we get a healthy Christian Watson who's on the field for majority of games, who can, I think, potentially be that like true X and the year 2 jump of a number of those guys that you listed. So the Packers have a lot of talent. It's just about getting them to that like next stage. But it's, I think, really hard not to be excited about that. I wouldn't be surprised. I want your take on this. I wouldn't be surprised if they added talent, but it's already such a loaded room. I don't know how much more you can spread the ball around to any more receivers. I guess they would have to love, like really, really love someone in this draft.
That's where I'm at. I absolutely give the position the green light. I think that Jaden Reed, we talked about this on the show, right? A ton is your 1,000-yard receiver. I could really see him being a true one. I could also see Christian Watson coming back healthy, which it sounds like, the hamstring evaluation went well, and they have theories on how to fix it. So that would be incredible. But I think you have a locked in 4, which is Dobbs, Watson, Reed, and Wicks.
Yeah.
That's a lot. They like Bo Melton. They like Malik Heath, but I don't know if you can call them roster locks, but potentially you're looking at 5 and 6. But I do think that they're going to draft a receiver if somebody that they really like falls to them. Maybe especially if somebody has like a different body type that they don't necessarily have on the roster.
What would that be?
I was going to say they kind of have a little bit of everything, but I don't know. I could see like a big body possession receiver, because you've got Christian Watson, who's like a big body speedster. But if you like a bully kind of receiver,
yeah,
potentially. But yeah, green light. I mean, this room is going to be really fun, and the injuries make you a little bit nervous, but that's why you have the fringe guys like Bo Melton and Malik Heath that we saw come in and play really, really well in their spot duty.
Yeah. It's impossible not to be super pumped. And I think the development in this next season is going to be the most interesting thing to watch for this group. Who's going to keep ascending? Who's going to maybe have a little bit of that sophomore slump? Because look, not everyone is going to take that jump, right? You have to expect that. I mean, we're all very high on all of them. Not all of them are going to keep becoming that next great thing.
Yeah, Packer fans have a real love of the bottom of the roster kind of players. We see it every year in training camp, and that's not to say guys like Bo Melton don't deserve their flowers. He was the first 100-yard receiver this season in a game, right? Like there's some really cool things that happened, and guys made the most of their opportunities. But Packers fans also tend to think that everyone we find is like a diamond in the rough somewhere, and that just doesn't pan out in the NFL, regardless of position. Like it's amazing when it does, and it's a fun story, but still really easy guys to root for.
It's because of Donald Driver.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone thinks that we found the next Donald Driver, like 7th round pick, and then ends up being like the highest, receiving, scoring, like legend in NFL, in our franchise history. And, not everyone's going to be DD.
How irreplaceable too. It's just an absolute legend. But all right, let's talk about tight ends, because I talked about the receiving room potentially missing a huge bodied possession threat. And then you've got 2 of them in Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft. Josiah DeGuara remains unsigned. He is still a free agent at this point. Rounding out the roster, they did bring back Ben Sims and Tyler Davis. So a pretty strong core, I think. I think they really like Ben Sims and Tyler Davis. And Joel Wilson is also on the roster as a 5th name. So thoughts on the tight ends, red light, green light? I think I know where you're going.
Okay, so when you were talking about the wide receivers, I was thinking about how it's really hard to talk about them without talking about the tight ends, because The pass catchers need to, I think, be discussed as like a unit, especially on this team, right? I actually I'm iffy on this one because I feel so confident on the top half of this room and then not confident on the bottom half of this room, right? Because you have your Luke Musgrave and your Tucker Kraft tandem, and you're like, yes, 100% green light, go. But the bottom half, you get another injury. And yes, Tucker Kraft was incredible when he was asked to, move up into that tight end 1 spot after Luke went down with his kidney laceration. But you're an injury away from having, a pretty large hole, like a pretty large gaping hole. So I feel a little like yellow light on this room. I know that's
Slow down.
I know that's not part of the game, but I would really like to see them add to this room before the start of the season. I'm happy Tyler Davis is coming back, but again, it's cautious optimism coming back from ACL is, Packers fans know it's no walk in the park. And he really is just a special teamer. So while they have their 2 main guys, they need depth there.
Yeah, I actually give this the green light. And I say that because I think Ben Sims really reminds me, as bad as it sounds, of Tyler Davis from a couple of years ago, where the Packers were so high on him as a coaching staff and a front office, and they valued him higher than I think Packers fans did. And then, we saw Tyler Davis unfortunately struggle in the preseason and had like the drops, and we wondered if he was going to make the roster. I don't know, if Sims will go through that same kind of thing, but I think the Packers really like him as a third tight end. So if they feel comfortable with that 3 and then Tyler Davis is like your core teamer as 4, I'm all about it. But if, I agree with you, if Sims and Davis are the 2 you trot out there in 12 personnel because something happened to Musgrave and Kraft, then it's not great. But I do think the Packers are pretty high on Ben Sims. So I think that's also part of the reason that they're not really like begging Josiah DeGuara to come back.
Yeah. I mean, Josiah DeGuara did not ascend to anything, unfortunately. So.
All right, let's talk about the offensive line here, because I think this is probably where the biggest question marks hit when it comes to the offensive side of the ball. John Runyon Jr. left for the Giants in free agency. Yosh Nijman signed with the Panthers. So there's a lot of missing depth here. David Bakhtiari, obviously the big name, gone. So right now, on paper, you would have Rasheed Walker, Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, who's coming into a contract year. This is the last year of his rookie deal. Sean Ryan probably is your right guard, and then Zach Tom. Depth pieces are there, kind of, not a ton. Royce Newman is the only other guard listed on the roster that's not in that starting lineup. And then for offensive tackles, you have Caleb Jones, Kadeem Telfort, and Luke Tenuta as the other tackles, not, in that starting lineup. Tenuta, I think, is the only one that actually has career snaps under his belt, and there's like 5. So really a ton of inexperience there, even though there are some bodies in the room.
Red light. Yeah, I mean, this team needs bodies. It needs competition. It needs depth. It needs like one injury away from being concerns on the line. And again, it's interesting because like you look at the top end starters and you feel very confident about them in Elton Jenkins and Zach Tom, but those are only 2 of your starting 5. So I think mega competition and a great year to need offensive linemen in the draft. I mean, fantastic year. So I think the Packers go into this draft, they come out with multiple linemen across each of the days. I'd be surprised if they didn't come away with at least 2. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'd say 2, if not 3. And you go into camp with 10 to 12 guys and you say go and see who comes out on top.
Yeah, I think the Packers definitely invest in the interior quite a bit, especially with Josh Myers entering the last year of his deal. We don't know what that's going to look like, if they want to bring him back or if, they'll let him test the market. So Zach Tom, of course, can play center. Elton Jenkins has played center. He was drafted as a center, but a lot of these guys have kind of found homes elsewhere. So you don't necessarily want to move them, because then you're losing, like, if your strength is right tackle and then you move your right tackle to center, and now you have a gaping hole at right tackle. So I do think this is a really good year to need offensive linemen, and I think the Packers will absolutely get at least 3. Yeah. But red light for sure for now. As it stands, absolutely red light, because you're an injury away from starting, I don't know, maybe Caleb Jones at left tackle. Like, I would love to see that, right? He's the biggest dude on the team. Like, that'd be really cool, but preseason, not in the regular season.
No.
All right, let's flip it to the defensive side of the ball and talk about the defensive line, because as I was going through and writing this positional analysis for Cheesehead TV and the draft guide, which you should check out if you have not done so already and pre-ordered, holy cow. It feels like every year I write that positional analysis, I'm like, the Packers need help on the defensive line. And this year I'm writing it and I'm like, wow, there's so much help on the defensive line. You have Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks, Colby Wooden, TJ Slayton, and then Jonathan Ford is also a 7th round holdover from 2022. So I don't even know if they have enough room left for more bodies.
Yeah, I feel great about this position now. Obviously love to see a jump from Devontae Wyatt from this past year to next year. Going to be playing in a new scheme, which I think we hope will help everybody. Kenny Clark is Kenny. And I don't think we need to say more about Kenny. Is this year 9 for Kenny?
8 or 9. Like yeah. What was he, the 2016?
He's the last guy left from Ted Thompson. So, but this is again a position group where I feel like at every level they have their starters, they have their depth guys, they have the pieces that they know who are rotational, they have the pieces that they took last draft who we hope to take that next jump, and it's finally a strong position group.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely green light. I'm so excited to see some of these guys, especially if we talked about, like, I know Colby Wooden was going to put on some weight. I think Carl Brooks doing the same as rookies. That tends to kind of happen in the year 2. Devontae Wyatt had a really nice end to his season. Kenny Clark had a career best, which seems crazy for somebody that's been in the league for this long and is still somehow only 28. Like, I feel like Kenny Clark should be, like, talked about with, like, BJ Raji and Mike Daniels. It's been so long that he's just been in the league, but really, really fun to be able to talk about that unit as a position of strength. And I'm really excited to see, as we kind of transition into the edge rushers, how these units will mesh under Jeff Hafley and how he'll utilize guys like, maybe Wooden will rush off the line a little bit. Maybe Preston will kind of come in as that, like, roaming nose. But let's segue. Let's talk about the edge rushers and how we feel about that unit, because there are, of course, some concerns with depth. You've got Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith signed the team or restructured to stay a Packer. They've got Lucas Van Ness, the 1st round pick from last season, did lose JJ Enagbari for the season with an ACL injury in the playoffs. But then there's a ton of depth on this roster. It feels like all of the Packers' future contracts went to edge rushers. You've got Brenton Cox Jr., Kenneth Odumegwu, Aaron Mosby, Deslin Alexander, Keyshawn Banks, and DeAndre Johnson, all as depth pieces in that unit. So I know the Packers liked Brenton Cox Jr. at one point. Like, there's some names here, but what are your thoughts just from the unit as a whole?
This is another, like, yellow light for me. Like, I feel really good, obviously, about the starters, and I feel a lot better knowing that Preston Smith is coming back. I think without Preston, this room looks a lot different. I still think they take an edge rusher in this draft. Maybe not 1st round.
Chop Robinson. Just
kidding. But somewhere maybe like day 2. Actually, you know what? Maybe, yeah. Well, so we'll say yellow light. I think if they add another like ascending body, but I mean, Rashawn, Preston, and then LVN takes that jump. Like, that's an incredible starting rotation for Jeff Hafley.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun. And I think, like, the style, and that's why I joke about, like, a Chop Robinson, because they have what feels like to me a very similar body type in their 3 edge rushers. They like the big power rushers, and Preston can win with speed. We've seen Rashawn win with speed. Like, we know these guys are capable of it. Lucas Van Ness has really nice bend, but I think maybe getting them something a little bit different, like a smaller edge rusher who wins with quickness, would be really interesting for Hafley. I think when we talk about inside linebackers later on, kind of in the draft, we'll talk about Quay Walker and the inside linebacker blitz and, you know, the rushing 7 that we've seen Hafley do. But yeah, the pieces I think are there. I'm going to give this one a red light, but it's like a really soft red light. Like, just like, it's like a California stop where you just like tap your brakes and you can keep on rolling. But I like what's there. I just
it's a yield.
Yeah. There we go. All right. Let's talk about the inside linebackers, because not a lot there at this point. The Packers released Devondre Campbell. So that means Quay Walker is, we're assuming, going to be wearing the dot. He'll be communication and the headset. That leaves him with Isaiah McDuffie as a running mate. Eric Wilson has not been re-signed, so he is not on the roster at this point, which means the Packers only have Christian Welch and Christian Young on the roster as their 2 depth pieces. And I believe Welch is more of a core special teamer who potentially could get looks inside, but yeah, not a ton of depth here. Packers definitely need to do something with this unit.
Yeah, I mean, this is a red light. This has been a red light. It remains a red light. We love Quay. We believe in Quay. We think he's going to be integral in this new scheme with Jeff Hafley, but Quay cannot be who we think Quay can be without a running mate. And right now he does not have that. And that is a bit scary. I don't know if it's something they will address early in the draft. I have not looked at the inside linebackers coming up. They obviously did not address it in free agency. All the inside linebackers who I thought would potentially be good fits got snatched up and went elsewhere, such as the game. But it needs to be addressed because they cannot go into 2024 with the list that you just went through.
Yeah, I, had certain expectations that there were players that I thought would be really interesting for the Packers to look at in free agency. And as is normally the case, those didn't come to fruition. But I kind of like that because there's a pretty good class for inside linebackers. And then I think you let Jeff Hafley kind of get the guy that he really covets. There were some interesting like stopgap pieces, I think, in free agency, but not necessarily anyone that would have like completely moved the needle as far as what they'd bring to the position opposite Quay. So I could see it. I don't think the Packers will necessarily invest a first round pick again because that was really an anomaly when they did it with Quay. But I think a day 2 pick is very deserved for inside linebacker because it's absolutely, at this point, I think you can put it past safety as the biggest need on the roster, even though I do love Isaiah McDuffie and I have advocated for him to stay in Green Bay. I think he's going to play really well this season as a third option and maybe even as Quay's running mate, but they at least need depth, if nothing else. Like, you've got to get a rookie that can develop.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about safeties. Then we can end with your favorite. But since I already teased safeties, let's look at that room. Obviously, we have Xavier McKinney, a really fun addition that came over in free agency. But then there's Anthony Johnson Jr., Zane Anderson, Tyler Coyle, and Benny Sapp III. So at this point, I mean, if you were trotting out a roster tomorrow, I'd imagine Anthony Johnson Jr. is the running mate with Xavier McKinney, but zero depth.
It's still a red light. Like, they made the biggest splash signing in free agency, and it's still a red light, which just like goes to show how bad this room was to begin with. I mean, you get Xavier, not that we're going to knock on wood here, but like Xavier McKinney pulls a hammy and has to miss 2-3 games and you're screwed, right? And this is like a very plausible scenario. So the Packers need to address this again ASAP. I don't know if they do it in the draft. I don't know if they go and sign one of the other safeties who are still available in free agency. There are a handful left. Obviously, they don't covet them if they haven't gone out and done it. But you cannot have Maybe they like Anthony Johnson Jr.'s sophomore ascension? If so, wonderful. I'm not banking on that. Are you?
Well, and that's hard, right? Because even if he plays really well and has a really nice sophomore season, there's still an injury away from Zane Anderson being out there. Like,
Yeah.
even if you love your 2 starting safeties, it doesn't necessarily mean much when you don't know what the depth is like at the rest of the room. So, I mean, I think our old friend Micah Hyde is still out there somewhere. That would be a fun reunion. But yeah, safety is definitely in need at this point, even with, like you said, the biggest splash signing in free agency grabbing Xavier McKinney. It'll be a really fun room, I think. There's a lot of upside and a lot of promise with him being on the roster and still only 24, but no, can't go out into the season like this with depth. Rudy Ford is still out there, which is kind of interesting to me. Jonathan Owens got snatched up right away. Darnell Savage got snatched up right away, but Rudy Ford is still out there, so I don't know how the Packers would feel about a reunion with him, but he definitely was, of the 3, the person that I thought would be most likely to come back at the end of the season, given how everybody finished. So
yeah,
we'll see. He kind of feels like one of those guys that they'll wait and see what shakes out after the draft, like how the board falls before they make any of these last kind of roster moves. But all right, last position group. Well, no, we'll do special teams too, I guess. So last side on defense, we've got the cornerbacks. Perry, how are you feeling with Jair Alexander, Carrington Valentine, Eric Stokes, Keyshawn Nixon, Corey Ballantyne, and then they did also go in and sign Robert Rochelle, and their depth pieces are Zion Gilbert and Anthony Johnson, not to be confused with Anthony Johnson Jr.
Yeah, I give this group a green light. I mean, I think that like it's hard not to look at the way they played last season. You're hopeful that Eric Stokes is going to come into the season healthy. I do still think that they grab someone in the draft. So I don't think they're even going to go into the season with just that group. But I mean, it's hard not to look at the starters and think solid. Packers are solid. It's going to be a fun year, especially with Xavier McKinney back there with them as well, and in a new scheme. Let's hope for some more aggressive, non-soft coverage.
I mean, we talked about this, right, last week. Like, Jair, Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, and Xavier McKinney are going to talk the most trash of like any secondary in the entire league. But yeah, 1000% green light. So let's just wrap here really quickly with special teams, because Keyshawn Nixon plays a big role in that too as well. And I think that factored into him getting such a big contract to stay in Green Bay long term. 2 years, all-pro kick returner. He's back there returning kicks for the foreseeable future. Anders Carlson is your kicker. They brought in some competition for him. And then they have Daniel Whelan, the punter, and Matt Orzech as a long snapper. Like, how do you feel, I guess, about special teams going into the season after the way things finished?
I mean, not great. I don't know. Like, they were still ranked bottom of the league in special teams last season. So it's hard to see them the Packers going into the 2024 season with the same group and think, yes, like this feels like red light,
Yeah.
Like you were in the 20s, ranked in the 20s, that's bottom of the league. And there weren't any changes. Now, again, I'm very happy Keyshawn Nixon is coming back, but he's a small part of this unit. I'm more concerned about the kicking unit than I am about the returning unit.
Right.
So I'd like to see some kicker competition. And
yeah, Keyshawn Nixon can only do so much. He can get you good field position, but he's not the one going out there to try to put up 3 points or put up 1 point. So as fun as it would be if he breaks 6 a couple times this season, it's not going to swing the needle as much as having a reliable kicker. So there is competition there for Anders. We'll see if the Packers are, inclined to like draft anyone else for a true competition. But I think special teams kind of, and I guess we'll see what happens with all these proposed rule changes as well, right? Like what it looks like with touchbacks and return ability. And I don't know. I think Anders Carlson has a lot of room for improvement. Like we saw with his brother, there's plenty of time for growth. And I think Rich Bisaccia is really good at that. You know, he might not be phenomenal to some fans in a number of aspects, but I think his development of kickers is probably pretty good. So we'll see. But any final thoughts about the roster? I think we would give the coaching staff a green light. Front office gets a green light. So I don't know. I have nothing else.
I mean, I would say at this point in the offseason, with months and months to go, to have this many green lights on this roster, we should feel confident that they're going to go into the season, you know, feeling pretty strong. This is pre-draft, right? Yeah. So think about how many holes this team is going to fill post-draft. You know, we'll do our tons of post-draft or draft content to come. But I think they've put themselves in a very good position.
Yeah, I think they had like 2.5 red lights on the entire roster. So really good place to be in heading into the draft. But that is all the time that we have for today's show. Thank you so much for joining us. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at PWSS Podcast, Perry at Perry_Goldstein, me at Maggie J. Loney. If you are listening to us in the audio format, thank you so much. We appreciate all of the downloads that you share each week. And if you're finding us on YouTube, we appreciate the subscriptions for that as well. Please make sure to like the videos if you haven't already, and subscribe if you're new here. We appreciate that as well. We'll be back next week, probably starting our draft content since we're just about a month away. So really exciting. We'll get to talk about all these roster holes and see how the Packers can potentially look at filling those. But thank you as always, and go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.